So the title of this talk is It's Time to Embrace Erlang. I think we cat's out of the bag on that. All right, and that's me, Todd Resudek, and I'm currently a software engineer at a company called SimpleBet. So SimpleBet, if you're watching this in the 2020s, you may not have heard of us. If you're watching us in the 2030s, we used to be a small company. And so we apply machine learning models to sports gaming, and we're able to offer gaming products that the world has never seen before. And as Desmond mentioned, I work on the Hex core team, and you can find me online. Super simple. All right, so when I started learning Elixir in 2016, this is kind of the sentiment that I got was Elixir is the solution to Erlang syntax. So Erlang is great, it's got this great VM, but it's really kind of uncomfortable and unwieldy to work in. So we came up with this solution, so now you can write in a different language and still get the power of Erlang. But as I started going through my journey of learning Elixir, I don't know if anybody else does this, but when I find when I look up a function in the standard library in Elixir, there's like a little like brackets on the side of the name of the function. You click in that, you can see the source code of Elixir. And time again, like what I find in the Elixir source code is stuff like this, which is, oh great, I've got this integer to string, and what does it do? It literally just drops into Erlang and calls a native Erlang function, does nothing else. And not to say that that's what all Elixir is, but more of it maybe than I expected is this. So obligatory meme, realize that this is kind of what that is, and then another obligatory meme. Okay, so if you haven't figured out, like under the hood, yes, Elixir is Erlang. All right, so I think most people, if you started your journey in Elixir from another language, so there's a few people like the aforementioned Brett who started in Erlang and came over to the Elixir side. But most of us, myself included, came from other languages, high-level languages. And you may have never have seen an Elixir function before. And so this is an example. So now you can say, yes, I have seen Elixir code before, and I definitely do not like it, or it's not as bad as I thought it was. So yeah, it is a little bit weird. But everything that you see for the first time might be a little bit weird as well. So the goal of this talk is to sort of outline what I see as being the problems and some potential solutions or things that we can do in our community to make it even better. So in our community, we pitched Elixir as this solution to the Erlang VM, or Erlang syntax rather. And what that really does is it attracts people who tried out Erlang, who know enough to know that Beam is really powerful, but just didn't like the syntax of it, which is a pretty small group, I would think. And it's going to naturally offend or alienate people who already spent a lot of time invested in Erlang. So you're basically saying this thing that you love, it sucks. So we made this sugar syntax to cover it up. And so what that ends up doing to our community is sort of fragmenting it is the people that had the most knowledge of the Beam just weren't interested in Elixir. So you've got people that had spent 10 years or 15 years working in Erlang, and they see this Elixir thing coming up, and they're like, whatever, I don't really need to get involved with that. They're only around because they think that Erlang syntax is terrible, and I think it's actually pretty good. And so you end up with this forked community where you've got the OTP team and all the people that work on OTP, and then the Elixir team and all the people that work on the Elixir ecosystem sort of working in parallel, and every once in a while maybe coming together because something has broken something else. And in general, it just limited the growth of the community to sort of have two different Beam communities, I guess, that coexisted. So that's I think problem number one. So problem number two is, since we start out being taught that this is the solution to Erlang, we go way out of our way to avoid even the minimal amount of Erlang programming. So if a solution involves dropping down into Erlang, we try to look for another solution. Or we make a library, or we find a library that just wraps Elixir or Erlang code in an Elixir API and use that instead. And so I got this right from elixirlang.org from Jose. And so if you go in the Getting Started guides, you'll see this line amongst many, many other lines on that page. But it says, Elixir discourages simply wrapping Erlang libraries in favor of directly interfacing with Erlang code. And so I think this lesson has always been there, but I just don't think that anybody has really paid much attention to it. So case in point, it's HTTP poison. So it's time for a tough talk. So yeah, this is, thank you. So let's talk about HTTP poison for a second. I think this is like the quintessential example of avoiding Erlang for no good reason. So if you make a request in HTTP poison, which I assume most of us have done before, this is essentially what you're doing. You hit the request function, and you've got these 5 arguments: method, URL, body, headers, and options. And HTTP poison has a direct dependency on Hackney, Hackney being an Erlang library. And this is what the Hackney function that does the exact same thing looks like. So method, URL, headers, payload, options. So we've switched, the body and the headers around from 3rd to 4th positions. And that's essentially, when you're bringing in that dependency for poison, that's essentially what you're giving yourself, is the ability to reverse the 3rd and the 4th argument versus just calling Hackney directly. So if you look in HTTP poison, eventually that function call resolves down to this. So do requests, and boom, just what you'd expect. Takes the arguments, puts them in the correct order, and just dispatches that to Hackney. And so as somebody that's very interested in dependency management, what sort of freaked me out is if you look at HTTP poison's hex page here, it's got 13,700,000 downloads. And so there's 13.7 million apps out there that have this dependency that they probably don't need. What's the big deal about dependencies? Great question, Node developer. Another side of the coin is that you really don't want to bring in a dependency that you don't need to, because you have to maintain it, you have to make sure that it doesn't have any vulnerabilities. And so the less code that you bring into your system that you didn't write yourself, aren't familiar with, or aren't directly maintaining, probably the better off that you're going to be. At least that's another way of looking at dependencies. That's my personal philosophy. If you are a Node programmer, it's totally anathema to that. Forget everything I just said. But what's even more concerning is that there are 1,300 libraries that use HTTP poison as one of their dependencies. So not only if you're bringing HTTP poison into your app, that's fine. Like, you've directly defined it in Mix. You know that it's, you've sort of identified this as a dependency that you need to manage. But there are 1,273 library owners, publishers, that decided they didn't want to drop directly into Hackney for that one function call, and instead brought in this extra library that now if you use one of those 1,200, now you have HTTP poison even though you didn't want it. And so that, to me, that gives me this look on my face. So it makes me kind of cringe. All right, let's talk about crypto. Boom. Not that kind of crypto, though. Hashing. So there are a few modules that just never got brought into the Elixir standard library. So if you've ever needed to hash something, you've probably had to drop into Erlang syntax anyway. So like, this is an example of just giving a SHA or running a SHA-256 hash on a quote-unquote secret here. And so if you ever need to do something like this in Elixir, you really don't have any choices other than to drop into Erlang syntax. So it pays to know something about Elixir modules to know where to look for this, find the crypto module, find the hash function, etc. There's a library out there called xcrypto that currently has 200,000 downloads that will do this for you in Elixir syntax. And essentially, this is, again, like what it looks like, very similar to what HTTP Poison does to Hackney. It calls down into Erlang and changes the syntax of the error in case you get an error. So literally, a library exists to do this for you. So instead of getting error not supported, you get an error tuple. And so I'll let you make your own judgments as to whether that's really a valuable use of our time or not. All right. So problem 3, and I'll posit this. This is when I begin my thought leaders section of the talk. To be great in Elixir, you must know at least some Erlang. And so I think this is a lesson that was probably beat into me by a guy, full credit going out to a guy named Brian Paxton, who is also works with Desmond at Pay It Off. So he's got a lot of smart people there. Definitely recommend if you're looking for a job, talk to Desmond. Again, if you're watching this in 2030, Pay It Off used to be a small company before it was purchased by Halliburton. So the future is great, isn't it? Okay, so this is another quote that I pulled right from elixirlang.org, so Jose's manifesto, if you will. So as you grow more proficient in Elixir, you may want to explore the Elixir or the Erlang standard lib reference manual in more detail. So it's just kind of like a throwaway comment, but I swear it's actually in there. So I'm going to give you some reasons to do that. So here's some features that do not exist in Elixir. Binary module. So it's useful for when you're dealing with binary data. It's not necessarily UTF-8 encoded. Formatted text. So if you look at like printf, for instance, that's something that doesn't exist yet in the Elixir standard library, but you have access to in Erlang standard library. Ets and dets. Round of applause if you currently use ets or dets. All right. Great. So we've already got some Erlangers here. So if you've used either one of these, the interface to these is Erlang syntax. And so it pays to know Erlang to know that those are available. The Dygraf module. So this is a kind of a new one for me. So this contains, I got a round of applause for Dygraf. All right. So this contains functions for dealing with directed graphs built of vertices and edges. So I want to explore this just a little bit because I think it's pretty cool. So if you're not familiar, in mathematics, and more specifically in graph theory, a directed graph or a digraph is a graph that's made up of a set of vertices connected by edges where the edges have a direction associated with them. So this is like a simple diagram. If you've ever done any like graph theory at all, or if you've looked at somebody tried to explain graph databases to you, or any of that, you've probably seen something like this before, showing what a graph database would look like and connections between nodes and distances. So in this case, the white dots are the vertices or the nodes, and then pairs of those together, so the connections of the two would be called the edges. And so in Nini, she knows all about edges. Does anybody else like Nini Leaks as much as me? Yeah. Trance? Okay, thank you. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. So you've got this kind of built-in graph database that's built into Erlang, which you've already installed on your machine by virtue of installing Elixir, right? And so just think of the problems that you have, maybe small problems where you're like, well, we don't really want to install a graph database. Maybe we'll use one of AWS's graph services for this little thing. You have access to a very simple directed graph system already on your machine, already being built with all your releases. So just think about maybe digging into that a little bit the next time you need to solve that problem. All right, Some other things that are in Erlang that are not in Elixir is this math module. So I know Elixir and Erlang aren't necessarily known for math necessarily, but if you want to do anything more advanced than just plus or minus or divided by, if you need to do an advanced hyperbolic cosine, for instance, you're going to need to use the Erlang math module. Somebody can explain what a hyperbolic cosine is to me later. So if you need to do anything more advanced than just the simple calculator, if you find yourself rotating your iPhone to get the scientific calculator, now you're in Erlang. All right, Q, the Q module. So this is another one that I wasn't necessarily aware that was in the Erlang standard library. The Q module is built in. It's a double-ended queue, FIFO queue, that handles that stack in an efficient manner. So if you need a simple first in, first out queue, you don't need to look to any external libraries. You don't need to implement it yourself. Drop into Erlang. Q module does that. It has a bunch of cool functions already built into it. And rand, obviously seen this if you need to come up with a random number or a random seed. And zip and zlib. So if you ever need to compress files, pass them around, all the compression stuff is right in the Erlang standard libraries. So we use this a lot in hex packages, for instance. But if you have any need for compressing files or folders, Erlang's got that covered for you. All right, one more case of why you should learn Erlang, and this is telemetry. So this is I think this is a really accurate depiction of what telemetry is. And I got this from the Erlang Solutions website. But if you're not familiar, I'll give you a second to look at that. So telemetry is just our standard way in the ecosystem of kind of reporting data about our libraries and of our applications. And so I believe Chris McCord introduced telemetry at ElixirConf in either 2017 or 2018, I think 2018. And it was originally written in Elixir. And I guess very soon thereafter, a discussion was made that let's make this interoperable with all of the Beam systems, and let's rewrite the whole thing in Erlang. And so if you are looking to contribute to a big part of the ecosystem in the future of Elixir, there are people that are contributing to Elixir Lang, the standard library, but Jose's already talked about how that feature work is really winding down on that. So as we're adding more and more features, I think we're going to find ourselves writing them in Erlang to make them cross-compatible. Or I shouldn't even say cross-compatible, but compatible across any Beam language. And so a big project, if you want to contribute to that, something big like telemetry, you're going to find yourself writing some Erlang. All right, still not convinced? Does anybody remember this talk from ElixirConf last year? So Jose kind of discussed what he was going to be doing in the future for Elixir and sort of gave this map of what the Elixir ecosystem looks like or how it relates, I guess, to the Beam directly. And so there's Elixir, Erlang, then there's the core and the kernel, SSA, and then all the way down to the virtual machine. And he was explaining that his work is going to be out of Elixir and maybe even out of Erlang further to the right of that stack. And so, like I said, as we're contributing more and more to our ecosystem, you're going to find yourself needing to go further and further down that list. All right, still not convinced? Anybody? I say one hand. Wow, okay. It's from Sweden. It's pretty cool. As are these guys. Anybody know them? Trance, geez, nobody. Okay, that's a metal band called Ghost. Swedish is known for its metal scene. Okay, this is the Koenigsegg, Ericsson phones, Eric Meadows Johnson, all cool things. They're all from Sweden. All right, that's pretty cool. How do I get started? All right, well, here's some books. Fred Hebert has a book online called Learn You Some Erlang for Great Good. Adopting Erlang from Tristan Slaughter. Those are both available online for free. And then a couple of other books that are available that you probably would have to pay to download, but all really great resources for learning Erlang and for learning OTP. Also, can we get like a round of applause if anybody considers themselves an Erlanger or somebody that learned Erlang first? All right. Okay, look around at those people. Get to know who they are. So if you're interested in the community, we have our Slack channel, erlanger.slack.com. Come join us. One thing I noticed is in a lot of meetup groups, they're just called the so-and-so Elixir meetup. You know, the Berlin Elixir or Denver Elixir meetup, for instance. Try adding Erlang or changing the name to Beam to invite those Erlang people into your world. So you may still have some Erlang people show up anyway, but to let them know that you're actually really interested in attracting them as an audience or as a participant could be useful. I find a lot of the really engaging conversations that I have at our local meetup are with people like Brett or Tristan Slaughter that are more familiar with the Erlang side of things and can kind of give perspective on why things work the way they do. Make some Erlanger friends. So whoever clapped their hands, go introduce yourself to them. So next time you get stuck in Erlang, you can bother them online. All right, thanks everybody. And final shout outs to SimpleBet for sponsoring me to come here, as well as MPEX, all the organizers. This stuff doesn't happen by itself. There's a lot of work, so thanks for having me. And you can follow me online.